Hey guys, welcome back. Behavior Strategies for Class. This is our monthly chat with Andrew Smith, our school counselor, full of tremendous wisdom to share with all of us. And today we're talking about helping your students become socially aware. Because the more socially aware they are, the more functioning they're going to be in society. And of course, that is what we want for all of our students. So, Andrew, let's start with elementary. What are a couple ways, and I'm sure there's more, that we can help our students, your students, become more socially aware?
Yeah. So starting with the littles, like at the kindergarten, first, second grade level, a lot of times it's the emotional recognition. So do they know what other people are feeling? I always try and tie in, I always think of Brene Brown and
Oh,
her
yeah.
idea of like compassion versus empathy. So we develop the idea of like recognizing emotions first, because then that tells us how people are feeling and how we want to interact with them, and then
Right.
that starts building empathy. And so helping them recognize, oh, well, that person looks mad, or that person, what do you think they're mad about? What do you think
Yeah.
would, how would they feel about that? And a lot of times I tell people, just go throughout your day, your books, around you, like, oh, people watch, like maybe that's just the introvert on me. Like some people would be like, go interact with them and find out. I'm like, oh, no, no, let's just watch. um but how would they feel? How would you feel? And you start just having those guided questions, because so much of learning for self-awareness, I mean, obviously starts with themselves, but they need somebody to kind of frame it for them. And that's where that modeling and that social referencing, which is a big part of the awareness, comes from kids and their caregivers. So when you
Right.
have the when you have that healthy connection that we always talk about, then they're willing to go out on a limb and talk to you about, well, I would be mad, or I'd be frustrated, or I don't know why you'd be frustrated then. That doesn't make sense to me. And so you can start going from there. And it's a lot easier when you when you're playing with Legos, or you're reading Berenstain Bears books and things like that, where you can just kind of slip in a question there of like, I don't know, what do you think he would be mad, or how would Brother Bear handle that, or how would you handle it? And so you start doing the building blocks of that. When you start getting older, though, like older elementary and like fifth grade, self-awareness is developing developing awareness of your effect on others and how others are affecting you.
Hmm.
Are you in a level 5 like meltdown because your friend cut you off and when says, I can't be friends with you if you're going to be friends with them? And is there some
Right.
manipulation there, and are they affecting you? Are you having some reactionary things because of how somebody's treating you? Are you doing that to them? And so working on some of those awarenesses. um, and also I tend to be a little bit more honest on this end of like, are you having some weird reactions yourself where
Right.
it might be affecting your own, are you walking around with scissors? I had a kiddo do that once. It was just randomly for a week there, just walked around with scissors and nobody knew why. Nobody wanted to get around him because they didn't want things cut, because he would randomly cut things.
Oh,
So finally
gosh.
sit down and being like, dude, that's weird. Why are you walking around with scissors? And
Yeah.
that's why everybody's been avoiding you, because you have some scissors and you're cutting stuff.
Right.
You affect the people around you. And so just you're working on that awareness. When you get older, it's kind of the same thing. I don't know. I think about, some of the times where I think something's funny and I don't have I don't think through the full context of things. And then my wife's like, "Oh, you're an idiot." I can't believe you said that. Like,
Yeah.
you put your foot in mouth on that one. And so but it just it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit deeper, because you don't know exactly context of who's receiving it, because communication is giving and receiving information, and you don't have all the control over how that person receives that information or what lens they're taking it through. And so that's where it's the same concept, but it gets a little bit more complicated, a little bit deeper understanding from that. And so for high schoolers, it's how is your self-awareness for your own mental health, because mental health affects
Mm.
behavior.
Right.
um, how is that affecting you, and thus how is that coming out in your relationships and things like that, and your connections to other people. If you're not feeling like self-assured or self-confident, that anxiety starts creeping out in different parts of your relationships. So if you have a romantic relationship, are you feeling secure with them, or are you questioning? Are you feeling needy? Are you a stage three clinger? Or are you feeling secure and confident, and and you're allowing them, this other person, to have their own relationships and navigate through that at a high school level. That's not an easy concept to talk about. But it can be very telling about what that self-awareness is like. So that's a few things, I think.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think of, one of our fifth graders and, she's running out of the gym. She's throwing things at the adults and, um, she's crouching in the corner in the hallway and you try and talk to her and she's hissing at you. It's like, yeah, this is not going to be beneficial for you in order to make friends. Like, if your peers are walking by and they see you or hear you hissing, like this is not going to be socially acceptable, thankfully. That this is the behavior. And so, again, like you said, seeing like this behavior and how is it affecting those around her, her peers definitely are not going to be super interested in coming over to make friends. And then at the same time, she's like, well, I don't have any friends. Well, like you said, you have to have that real conversation to be like, what is the weird thing that you're doing, that nobody else is doing? And
To
granted, you may have friends, some friends who may be just as quirky who will be like, oh, yeah, you're cool. You're fine. You're hissing. Like, whatever, let's go. But for majority, this is not how you're going to communicate and make friends. And I think, that becomes even more important, as they get older. And granted, now you're going into middle school and then you're going to be going to high school. Like, is this the behavior that you're going to be socially accepted and be socially productive? And, so what are a couple strategies that you would give that student besides just the obvious of like, nobody else is doing this, crouching in the corner, hissing at adults, when they're trying to have a conversation. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the hissing, that's always an interesting one.
Yeah,
But I usually say is like, do you see anybody else hissing? And so you start using that social referencing as a tool for them to see and scan the rest of the room. You've talked about this many times about scanning the room, reading the room.
right.
What is everybody else doing? Um, so that's a key component right there of like, I'm with my cohort, I'm with my peers, I'm with my buds, my bras,
Yeah,
right? What are they doing? Because you know trying to connect is wanting to be part of the pack, right? There's
right.
a basic animal part of us that's like, I want to be in the group. And so that's also where that fake it till you make it comes in, about
Yeah,
where you go in and you replicate the behavior of the group. How are they reacting? That's where social referencing is. Like, how is everybody else reacting? I don't know what to do, but I know that these other people are acting this certain way, and so if I go with them, then I don't stand out as much and I'm accepted in. So there's different parts of that. So that would be a big part, would be start grounding them in what are the other reactions. The next part, I would say, is the self-awareness, is to start seeing how, or having them think about how they connect with others. And that's a hard
mhm.
topic at an elementary age, but we can have those conversations of like, when you got mad, what did your friends do when you got mad? Did they run off?
Mm, that's good.
And and usually that needs to be a conversation in a calm space. So
Right.
that's kind of that postvention or that wraparound part, however you want to call it. But like, you had a big reaction. What did the other people around you do? And so that's
Yeah.
a big place to start with kids, of like, what did your mom do? Wow, what did your mom say to that? Or what,
Hmm.
how did dad handle it? Because that'd be a big thing to throw a shoe and yell about the macaroni or something. I don't know. I made that one up. It's not like that happened this
That's
last
a good
weekend or anything.
one.
Um, so start having those conversations. That post mention part can help reassess and plan for the next time, because kids are going to make, we all make mistakes. Kids are going to make mistakes. They're practicing new skills.
Right.
Whenever you're practicing new skills, you're never the Michael Jordan of it right away, right? So that post mention part of it, that reassessment and then replanning is a very key part for that.
Yeah, that's
Let's
great.
m- working on matching your reaction to the level of the problem is a big one that I always talk about, because that tells you that you're aware of something that is bothering you, what's an appropriate way to handle it, and
Hmm.
that when I blow my top or I flip my lid, that I need to make sure that it's in an appropriate way, an appropriate level, because kids are forgiving, but
Right.
if every time you're going to start hissing at MSB, that doesn't work. You start throwing medicine balls at people. Kids tend to want to get out of the way for that and not be around.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a big part too.
Yeah.
Excuse
That
me.
is huge. And, sometimes that's hard for kids to realize, like, well, what do you mean? They're upset? Because especially youngers, like, of course it's all about them. But they did this and they did that and they did this. And it's like, nobody, but what did you do? How could you have, what could you have done differently, or what would have been more positive, and just continuing to train and show them like there is a better way, and to realize, like you said, their actions affect those around them. And one of the other big things too is accepting no. So, what are a couple strategies for some of the students when, either they're playing with their friend's hair and their friends like trying to get away from them, or they want to come play with them at recess and they're saying no, but they're still following them and chasing them, and then they're upset because no one wants to play with them, but realizing, accepting no. So, what are a couple ways that students could learn how to handle that?
Yeah. So the no is a tough one, especially with our little littles. But there's times with our older ones too where they're overthinking, and no means that they'll never get to do this. They'll never be my. And sometimes our littles jump right there. Like they don't take the 7 steps to get there. They just jump there.
Yeah.
And our sixth graders will do the like slow wind down and be done with it too. So reframing it as no doesn't mean never. No can mean not right
Right.
now. And that other people get a choice. Like you remember how you said no here. They get to say no, but let's look for the people who want to be around you. So reframing it in a couple different
Yeah.
ways. I love reframing because it just gives you the ability to take a look at things from a different point of view, which is kind of the basic definition of reframing is just looking at a different perspective, and so helping them kind of be in that perspective, and that can take role play of hey, tomorrow I know you were mad at Jimmy. He didn't
Yeah.
want to play with you. He wasn't nice, and he just said, "No, get away from me." What happens if he does that tomorrow? What's a plan? And
Right.
so using that reframing, but then collaborative problem solving. Ross Green is a big proponent of that, and he has a whole
Yeah.
system set up, right? And he'll sell it to you. But it's the basic of like, let's involve the people who matter most, which is the kids and the people who support the kids,
Yeah.
and let's solve this problem together. Because I could always tell you, you know, little Johnny, you can do it this way and you can do it that way because that worked for me. That might not
Yeah.
work for Johnny, right? And so having that collaborative problem solving can help them come up with their own solutions. And truly, when they start doing that, and it takes some guided parts to it, but
Right.
truly, when they start coming up with their own solutions, that's what's going to be the most effective, more than what we could ever teach them, because it's a self taught thing. They came up with their own. It's kind of like when my wife tells me that she really thinks that those flowers at Lowe's are the best things in the world. And I'm like, hey, for your birthday, I think I'm going to get that for you. So it's my idea. And then I'm
Right.
more willing to do that. Right. So it's the same concept, but a little bit deeper at well, sometimes at the 40-year-old level versus at the 4-year-old or the five, or, the fourth grade level. Right. The more ownership you have of your own ideas and the more willing you are to go through with them, whether it's your wife or whether it's going and play with a friend or saying no.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes back to, again, giving them a voice,
Yeah.
giving them that buy-in, their choice. Like you can give them those suggestions, but letting them decide, okay, well, I'm going to do it this way this time. And, just keeping that open communication going, I think is really vital. And giving them that voice, that buy-in, that ownership is huge for their growth as well. I agree. Um, let's see, what's another one would be in resolving conflict. This is another big social issue in resolving conflict and bringing those parties together. I think, like you said, those restorative practices and being able to have those conversations. What would be a couple ways? Like you said, like I'm at the elementary level. You're mostly at elementary. So, what are some ways that we can help them teach them how to resolve conflict in a socially accepted way?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's the life of like a second grader sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Or kindergartner. I I tend to refer to like Kelso's Choices as an SEL curriculum tie-in for the
Oh, yeah.
SEL month, right? And on Willow's Pond, or I think it's like something like that. And the one of the best parts of that program was it came out with a wheel and it had lots of different choices. And so I use that wheel in my guidance programs and my counseling program for K1 too, because it just gives
Mm-hmm.
you so many different choices. And so the visual reference helps of, you know, try to problem solve through sharing and taking turns, walking away, apologizing, because sometimes we're the ones that are in the wrong. And so it gives it a useful visual for those different things. But the problem solving conversations can happen in a lot of different ways. And really, what you're doing is, in my line of thinking, I think of a mediation session. Like, okay, tell
Yeah.
me what happened on your end.
Right.
Yes, what happened to you is important, and your view is important. Let's hear both sides, and then how do you guys come up with that solution? And so mediation and collaborative problem solving and different things like that is a very they're
Yeah.
very similar things, but once again using their voice in that choice. And you can even have these kindergartners know how to do this in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ways, as long with a little bit of structure and a little bit of like some cues of like, no, this is when you don't call him that name, this is when you just tell me what
Yeah.
happened. So a lot of role playing training on the littles can help. Um, but having that visual reference of what would be okay and having the conversation of being willing to be honest and say, like, that sounds like that works really well for you, but that's not going to work really well for anybody else. So
Right.
how can both of you guys be satisfied? And it's been interesting sometimes about when I do like a little mediation thing about what they'll agree to even.
Yeah.
um, I've had some kids where it's like, you know what, I didn't really want the ball. I just wanted to say hi to you, and then I ended up stealing the ball from you. So you go ahead
Yeah.
and play it for the rest of the time. Like, really? We have this whole thing about that. Okay, cool. Well, you
Right.
got I have. So there we go. Um, or you take it for the week, and then I'll maybe play with you next week or something. And
Right.
it's like, oh, we have this whole thing that was a thing here just a second ago. So there's conflict a lot of times happening all over the place because you have a whole bunch of kids like K1, 2, 3, whatever, in a room, and they all have some skills, and they're all trying to do whatever they think is best at the same
Right.
time. And you know, it's like herding cats. So there's lots of
Yeah.
opportunities, and if you don't quite catch that opportunity, you will next time. But just that role play and giving them options and letting them know that they have options, kind of what we've talked about with trauma and with connection seeking things, like
Right.
letting people know they have options to do that and that there's not just one way to do it. There's a lot of wrong ways to do it. but there's not the one right way. They have a few things that they can try out. And so giving them that voice choice, giving a few different options,
Right.
walking away, different things like that can help very much. And then when you get into the older kids, um, a lot of times it's like, how is this affecting you? How do we move past this? How can you guys move forward together?
Right.
And it may not be that you guys are friends, but y'all need to move forward because if you stick in here, none of you like this. You don't like the feeling of this. So tying it back to feelings and emotions really helps them kind of resonate with it, and creating that empathy factor and that connection to their bodies helps the self-awareness with the problem solving and kind of tries
Right.
to tie them in together so that they have that connection, that emotional connection to it as well. So
That's
a
great.
couple different things. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we know like social emotional learning, like SEL, it's here to stay. Like this is something obviously our students are going to need all the time, no matter what grade level they're in. And we're going to kind of cut it a little shorter today, but just to keep our time and what are some other what are some positive ways that our students can become more socially aware? I mean, obviously these are positive ways, but like I've seen some students like they're great, if Johnny needs help over here reading, they don't know what page they're supposed to be on. Some of those students don't have to be prompted to go and help the student over here or those students that have special needs and the gen ed students see that they're struggling in whatever it is they're doing in class and they just walk over and help that student. I think these are all social, um I wouldn't say cues, but socially that we need to affirm when we see those kids doing those positive social interactions. What are your thoughts on that? And then any other closing awesome wisdom that you want to share with us?
I think you're right on. That was those were examples that I was coming up with too, is allowing kids to be, because most of the kids want to be helpers of some sort. It
Yeah.
brings with them prestige, connection, everything we talk about. And most, I would say, if not all, most want to have that feeling and that helping part. And that just
Yeah.
drives that emotional development forward, which is always great. Um, you know, we could talk about looking for clues and different things like that about how people are reacting. But honestly, most of the time, if I get out of the way, a lot of times there's most kids are going to do the
Yeah.
right thing as long as they have an idea about it. So me getting out of the way and then catching them being good. My
Yeah.
goal this year as a professional was to try and catch kids being good and send them kudos to their
Yeah.
home, because we need to catch kids doing the best that they can,
Yeah.
because there's more than what sometimes we like to recognize as adults. And so most kids, and I truly believe this, most kids and most people are trying to do the best that they can
Yeah.
and want to do well and succeed. And so if we can catch them, then we just build that development, that praise, that behavioral momentum, however you want to put that.
Right.
Um, the PBIS of catching them 5-1 or whatever.
Yeah.
That's the thing that really starts driving that and just builds the good feelings, the good energy, the good mantras. So that's what I would say is just sometimes I have to get out of their way so that they can do a good
Yeah.
job. And just recognizing that most kids want to and will. And so that's a big thing, is just look for those things, kind of like what uh Mr. Rogers said, is like, even in the midst of those of tragedy, there's always people doing good stuff. There's always some good kids and some
Yeah.
kids doing good stuff. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's great. One of the other teachers I've worked with, she says that all the time, like, I'm gonna catch you doing something great,
Yeah.
and I agree. Sometimes we do need to back up because we want to help as well. But if we just sit back and wait a minute, those other students are gonna step up. And so if we jump in all the time, like we're taking that away from the other student, um, to be able to help and grow in that way. And so, definitely growing in those positive and catching those students and acknowledging those students who are doing those positive social interactions is really helpful in watching them grow as well. And so I want to say thanks again, Andrew, for being here, for
Pleasure.
sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, and encouragement and strategies that we can all start using today. And let's keep growing our students socially, emotionally as well, because we are all continuing to grow in that area. So, guys, I will see you next week with our last session of social emotional learning for this month. And thanks so much, Andrew, for being here.
So, have a good one.